Namaste everyone, and welcome to part 4 of The Students and the Scholar. For those who haven't joined previously, this session aims to bridge the gap between students with a passion for learning with scholars. Today, together we explore topics with Hindu Dharma and their modern day relevance. Before we begin, we'd like to commence with the Gayatri Mantra in order to enter the right frame of mind to commence today's learning. Om Bhurbhuvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Today we will discuss Buddhism and the extent of its relationship with Hindu Dharma, as well as an overview of what Buddhism encapsulates. And whilst we're here discussing, we would like to please encourage you all to like and share this video, as well as posting any questions you may have about the content discussed in the comment section below. We'll be selecting them out and answering them live towards the back end of this session. And we also have some polls going on, so be sure to send in your answers. And with that, I would like to introduce the students and the scholar for today's session. It is a great pleasure to welcome Acharya Vidyabhaskarji, our scholar for today. Acharya Vidyabhaskarji is a renowned scholar from the Omkarananda ashram in Switzerland. He was educated in the UK, Austria and Switzerland up to the age of 12, after which he followed his passion to study Sanskrit and ancient scriptures in the Sri Kailash ashram in Rishikesh for 6 years. Following a short period of teaching, he decided to enroll in the University of Freiburg in Switzerland. Here he completed up to a master's degree in comparative religion, and then went on to complete his postgraduate studies in organizational psychology. Presently, he teaches Sanskrit in Switzerland and is working on large translation projects, including translations of the 10 Upanishads of the Vedas, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and the essence of the Rig Veda. With NHSAP, he has toured universities, inspiring students with topics such as Dharma and happiness. He supports our Sanskrit Word of the Month initiative, taking us through authentic meaning of commonly used Sanskrit words. Thank you very much for joining us today, Acharya-ji. And representing our students today, we have myself. My name is Kajal Palmer. I'm the current campus secretary of NHSAP. I'm currently studying to be a primary teacher at the University of Birmingham. We also have Atharva Joshi, who's on the Sanskar team and is studying computer science at the University of Warwick. We'll now go through some discussions and then we'll have a final Q&A from the audience, so please do send in your questions.
Namaste, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. In order to start us off and introduce this topic, could you kindly provide us with a brief outline of the history of Buddhism?
The Buddha was originally called Siddhartha Gautama. And some of you who know their family Gotra is sort of the affiliation with the 7 sages of the Vedas, will know that one of these is indeed Gautama. So Siddhartha Gautama was clearly born in an overall Vedic tradition in what is today a border area between Nepal and Bihar in India, and of course around 550 BCE was Greater India, so that was simply India. And his father was Shuddhodana, a local ruler of the Shakya clan, which is why Siddhartha Gautama is called Shakya Muni, the sage of the Shakyas. And his mother was called Maya Devi. And he was born in this very sort of luxurious environment of a local ruler's family, and was, how can we say, protected very much, like typically your typical Hindu mother, right, who's very protective and wants to ensure that her little baby boy doesn't get spoiled by anybody. So it was the same in ancient times, and they raised him with great care. And then he became a great sage later, and he taught the 4 noble truths and the 8-fold path to achieve the cessation of suffering, the end of suffering. and to achieve lasting bliss. And then we could say that approximately 50 years after his passing, his main disciples got together and they created what we could call a very systematic approach, which has survived till the modern days, which is called the Pali Canon or the Tripitaka, which are the Buddhist scriptures. These were created from 50 to 100 years after the Buddha's passing, and became much later, about, I would say, maybe only in 500 Common Era, that's more than 1,000 years after the Buddha, they became what we would call a separate religion. Before that, it was simply part of wider Hindu Dharma, or just generally Dharma, because the name that Buddhism uses for itself is simply Dharma. So we need to clarify this point from the start, that Buddhism does not exist as an ism, it is simply Dharma, the same way that Hinduism doesn't really exist as an ism, it is Hindu Dharma. So essentially it is the same overall tradition. Does that help you as a sort of historical background?
Thank you, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. Yes, as an historical background, that was extremely vivid and definitely deepened my understanding, my initial understanding of how Buddhism came to be.
Me too. A question that popped to my mind as you spoke was, you mentioned that Siddhartha Gautama took the name Buddha. Could you explain the meaning behind the name Buddha?
Well, that's quite a complicated one because it requires some knowledge of Sanskrit. Sanskrit has many roots. Roots are like the basis of words, and the word Buddha comes from the root Bud. And Bud means to either to wake up, to be awake, or to know. And a Buddha is someone who has woken up from the delusion of selfishness, the delusion of seeing duality, and who has awoken to the light or the wisdom of non-duality, Advaya in Sanskrit, which is why the Buddha was the first person to be called an Advayavadi, the teacher of non-duality. We hear this term very commonly in modern Hinduism as referring to Advaita Vedanta, which is also the school of non-duality, but the Buddha was the first person to be called a teacher of non-duality because he has awakened from ignorance. He has awakened from the sleep of delusion, thinking, for example, that desires must be fulfilled, otherwise we are unhappy. That is one of these confusions. When we realize that that's simply not true, that we do not need to fulfill desires to be happy. Of course, some desires, sure, but not all desires. We can just observe desires and then they dissolve. We'll talk more about this later, but this is one of these typical delusions. We can just wake up and realize that that's not true, that we can actually rest in meditation and then our desires dissolve and we just have bliss remaining, you see? So that is what the Buddha woke up to. That is why he's called the Buddha.
Wow, that was quite interesting. Thank you. You also mentioned the Eightfold Path as part of Buddhism. Please could you expand on the ideas and concepts of this and its relation to the Four Noble Truths?
So can you give me like 10 minutes for this or 10 hours? So, Kajal, let me quickly run through the period when Buddha, called Siddhartha Gautama, lived as a luxurious youth. You know, he basically lived the life that all of you would like, you know, sort of the Westminster good life. And one day, his charioteer, which is quite interesting because Krishna was also the charioteer of Arjuna. Isn't that interesting? So Buddha's charioteer took him out, and that charioteer was really smart. He thought, let me take him to, you know what is sort of the East End, if I'm not mistaken, you know, sort of the shady parts. So he took Siddhartha Gautama to the East End of that region, which is called Kapilavastu. And for the first time in his life, Siddhartha Gautama saw someone who was really ill. Now that's hard to believe. You know that it took 28 years, but if you live healthily and your parents sort of shield you from that, it might happen, right? So he saw someone who was really ill. So he asked his charioteer, what happened there? And then he told him that that person is simply ill and diseased. He's got lots of diseases. And then Siddhartha Gautama realized that's going to happen to everybody, or could happen to everybody. And then sometime later, the charioteer took him out again. And then this time he saw someone who was really old. And again, he was shocked. He didn't realize that that just happens to everybody. You know, sometimes when you're living in a bubble, for example, when you just live in Soho, you don't realize that things in the East End aren't really that good, right? So he realized, wow, people don't just remain handsome and with beautiful hair all the time. I mean, look at my hair, it's completely gone almost, right? So, and I'm not that old as you think, you know, so, but that's life. So Siddhartha Gautama realized, wow, people get old. And then after some time, he took him out again, and then he saw a procession with a corpse. And Siddhartha Gautama, with a big shock, realized that people die and that death is inevitable and that everything ends in death. All our achievements, all our aspirations, all our loved ones, not just us, everyone ends in death, which is terrible. So he realized this. And then his charioteer, the wise man that he was, took him out once more. And then the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, saw a renunciant, a sannyasi, dressed in orange, who was meditating, and his face was shining with bliss and serenity and peace. And that's when Siddhartha Gautama asked, and what happened to that guy? And his charioteer said, well, that guy has found the path to truth and realized it. And then Siddhartha Gautama decided instantly that that's what he's going to do as well. So he left his palace, he left his kingdom, and for 6 years meditated under the guidance of great yogis in the forest, and then also on his own, and realized the truth of suffering, which is the first noble truth. The Arya Satya, the noble truth of suffering. And the noble truth of suffering or dissatisfaction is simply that everything you will experience, Kajal, 100%, everything you will experience in your life will ultimately lead to dissatisfaction. Because, first of all, your loved ones will die. No matter how handsome your boyfriend or your husband will be, Kajal, one day he will have this. No matter, and even if he doesn't, he will still die, you see? Everything will perish. Everything is impermanent. Your body, your feelings, your mind, your life breath, everything is impermanent. Therefore, everything will lead to dissatisfaction, ultimately. You can have temporary success, but it will lead to dissatisfaction. And then the second noble truth is that this is called the dukkha samudaya, the arising of suffering, the arising of dissatisfaction is due to the mind's tendency to be attached to desire, to want things so obsessively that ultimately when we don't get them or when they perish, we are dissatisfied and unhappy. Isn't that logical, Kajal? It's so clear, right? It's so vividly clear. But now, instead of being depressed and saying, oh, what shall I do now? Let me take an antidepressant. The Buddha realizes that there is also dukkha nirodha, the cessation of suffering. That this dissatisfaction that we are subject to in this human life can be ended. And how? Through the fourth noble truth, which is the marga, the path. And that consists of 8 steps. And Kajal, shall I just run through them very quickly? Yes?
Yeah, please.
So the 8 steps are really also supremely logical. It is almost as if this man was a scientist. The first step is, Kajal, you have to have the right view, the right understanding, the samyak drishti, the proper understanding. You need to understand, we need to understand that every single action, whether it is mental, verbal, or physical, has an effect. It has a consequence. It has a result, a phala in Sanskrit. And you will remember Adityaji, a good friend of mine, he came on this program of yours and he talked about the causes and effects, the structure of karma. You know, he touched upon that. That is the Buddha's teaching. But we need to have the right view. We need to understand that this is not just a belief. This is not just some dogma. This is not something that someone has pulled out of thin air. This is simply science. Because if you look externally in science, externally in the world, everything has a cause and an effect. If I drop this glass, it only has a little bit of soda inside. But if I drop it, what will happen, Kajal? It will fall. That is cause and effect externally. But the Buddha realized that there is also cause and effect internally, that our mind and consciousness is subject to cause and effect. Our actions produce results, and these can be visible. So if I'm always angry, I will be unhappy in the end, and I will make others unhappy. Or they can be invisible. It can take some time, perhaps later in this life, Kajal, or even in the next life, the effect will become about, you see? So that is the right understanding, the right view, samyak drishti is the first step. And once you have the right understanding and the right view, isn't it logical that you will have the right intention? Because which fool would have the right understanding but not the right intention? Isn't that clear, Kajal? It's so logical, isn't it? The right intention would be, well, therefore, I want to live life according to Dharma. I want to be of benefit to others. I don't want to just live selfishly. That would be foolish if I have the right understanding. And then the third step in the path is, well, if I have the right intention, then I need to have the right expression. It doesn't make sense to live in an ivory tower or to just spend my life in my bedroom thinking about the right understanding and the right intention, right? I need the right expression. And then the fourth step is, if I have the right expression, I will have the right action. I'm not going to just express myself rightly and according to Dharma. I will act according to Dharma with mind, with my speech, and with my body. Doesn't that make sense, Kajal? Isn't that so logical? And then, not just in particular actions, not just here and there, but in the form of actual livelihood. I'm not going to become a weapons manufacturer if I want to follow Dharma. I'm not going to become a DJ. And Kajal, I hope you're not going to become a DJ, right? Because a DJ, it can be a wonderful person, but a DJ is someone who makes people, you know, party and become, in a way, selfish, right? Unless it is Bollywood and Bhangra, that doesn't count, right? So, but I'm joking. But you see, the right livelihood is very important, that our actions must become meaningful for the benefit of others, not just selfishly. And then this is where the first part, the first 5 steps end, and these are called shila. These are called virtue, ethics. And following on from this comes what the Buddha then calls the right effort at becoming attentive. This is where it becomes more internal. If I want to overcome my inner problems and states, my inner anger, my jealousy, my envy, my pride, my greed, all these negative states, I need to become attentive. I need to make the right effort. I can't just be lazy. And, you know, Kajal, I'm sure you're young and I'm sure you like to sleep long, right? But the Buddha would say, don't sleep too long. You know, use your time wisely. Don't sleep till 10 o'clock. Sleep maybe till 7 o'clock, you know, and make it a habit to get some discipline, right? And don't roll around in bed in the morning as if you're sort of like a sloth. You know, he would say, come on, get up, right? He would say, do something with your life. That's right effort. And then comes the seventh step, which is the right attentiveness, the right mindfulness, the right attention to everything in our body, in our emotions, in our mind. Every single moment that occurs, we are able to observe vividly and with concentration. And when we do that, we become highly aware. We become highly compassionate, because we will instantly recognize the moment in which some upset or anger arises in us, which would cause harm to others or to ourselves. We would recognize it the moment it arises, you see? And then the last step is called samyak samadhi, the right meditative absorption. And the Buddha spends a lot of detail about how that is achieved, you see? It's not just putting out slogans like this, how that is achieved. And that's a long study. We can't cover this here in a webinar. Samyak samadhi, how to actually meditatively absorb yourself in your ultimate innermost being, absorbing yourself in the true nature of consciousness so that you will attain enlightenment. This is the Eightfold Path.
Dhanyavad, that was really eye-opening. Thank you.
Yeah, Dhanyavad, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. I couldn't help but, as you were explaining, seem to draw analogies between Hindu Dharma and the Eightfold Path in order to understand it a bit better in my head. So I was just wondering, could you expand on any common features or any differences, if there are any at all?
Wonderful question, Atharva. So I came to know that you're a mathematician. Is that right?
Yes.
So Atharva, who is greater, Carl Friedrich Gauss or Euler?
I think their contributions to maths are both equally great.
Who is greater, Newton or Ramanujan?
Again, both their contributions are equally as profound.
There you go. The Buddha is one of the great geniuses of Dharma, one of those mathematicians of Dharma, so to speak, who devised a step-by-step method which, if we follow it to the letter with absolute devotion, the word bhakti is not just a Hindu word, this is also a Buddhist word. With absolute devotion and absolute nishtha, absolute commitment, if we really follow the instructions to the end, including samyak samadhi, really absorbing ourselves in meditation and in the depth of our innermost being. If we do that, the formula always works. It is like really following through the mathematical methods of Ramanujan. They will always work. But the Buddha never said that this is the only formulation that is possible. In the Pali Canon, the Tripitaka, the traditional Buddhist scriptures, which are also called agamas, Samyukta Nikaya and Dirgha Nikaya and Majjhima Nikaya, beautiful scriptures, incredible scriptures. The Buddha says that in the future, there will arise Brahmins, that means what we call Hindus today, Brahmins, people from all walks of life will arise who will reach the same realization that I have reached. He clearly states this. He never says that I am the only one who has reached this and will reach this. He says there will arise in the future. And then he says, and yet their insight will always be the same as mine, you see? However, the formulation of that insight, the way perhaps that someone in later Hindu Dharma, a new master, a new avatar, a new manifestation of divinity, might formulate the path, might be slightly different. Do you see that? It might be slightly different. And yet the essence of it, the quintessence of it is still the same. So when you say differences and similarities, I can only point to Euler and Carl Friedrich Gauss. it makes no sense to separate them. We need to see them together, you see? We need to understand all of the Dharma traditions as one single symphony of supreme mathematics, and not separate the individual mathematicians and say that Carl Friedrich Gauss was better than Euler, or that Ramanujan was better than Carl Friedrich Gauss. That makes no sense. They all complement each other like a puzzle, right? So then maybe just very quickly, if you like to really know some difference, well, according to the real current Buddhist view, the probability that we might, if we do not live a virtuous life, the probability that we might end up as an animal again is much higher than current Hindu Dharma believes it. In current Hindu Dharma, people sort of think that bhakti, you know, to Krishna or to Devi or to Shiva is enough, and you can still be a sinner and you can still mess up things, and somehow, you know, Krishna will look after you and Devi will look after you. The Buddha would disagree. The Buddha would say, if you still have anger in you, no matter how much bhakti you had in your life, if you still have anger in you, even a whiff of anger, when you die, you're not going to just go to the divine realms. You will come back till that anger is resolved. And my conviction as a scholar is that if you look at the original texts of Hindu Dharma, they say the same thing. Because even a sage in Hindu Dharma, a great sage who became attached to an animal, to a deer, was then symbolically said to actually be reborn as a deer. So even in the Hindu scriptures, we have this view. So I sometimes am critical of the recent movements, you know, in the past 500 years, where in Hindu Dharma, things have become sort of a little bit, you know, a little bit very easygoing. Yeah, you know, let's just do bhajan, and then later we can go and fight with our family members, but we'll still get to the divine realm, to the divine loka. I don't think personally that that is true, you see? And I think this is where the Buddhists, they sort of get it right. But perhaps there are other things. For example, in some forms of Buddhism, there are bhakti traditions with deities, the same deities that we have. But in other forms of Buddhism, like in Theravada, there are different schools of Buddhism as well. Like in Theravada, there is only the Buddha, you see? And then there is Ganapati and Saraswati, they're also there, but mainly there's just the Buddha. And bhakti is only for the Buddha. And there, as a Hindu, I might say, well, why only to the Buddha? Why not to Ganapati? You see? So on both sides, there are these points that one can highlight. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. Yes, definitely. That was extremely enlightening. I never thought about it in that way. So thank you.
Thank you, Acharya-ji. We'd now like to go over to the questions coming through on Facebook Live. Our first question is from Avnish Mistry. He asks, what are your thoughts on the idea that life is suffering?
What's his name?
Avnish.
Avnish, my dear, this is not an idea. It is not an idea that life is suffering, my dear. This is just your lack of experience. You haven't suffered yet, right? And maybe not enough. Life is suffering. Just go out there and open your eyes. We are living in the Corona era. It's not an idea that life is suffering. This world is a world of impermanence. Our loved ones, our closest people are going to die one day. For some, this might happen very soon. I have a very good friend in the UK, and his mother just died, and he's only 24. So please, it's not an idea that life is suffering, it's the truth. The question is more, is it true what the Buddha says, that suffering is related to obsessively wanting things and not letting go? That's more the question you should be looking at. The question whether life is suffering, that's anyway clear. It's impermanent. We will never, ever always get what we want. Once we get it, we'll be afraid to lose it. Do you think that rich people are happy? No way. I know a lady who has more wealth than probably all of the NHSF students put together. You know, all your 6,000 students put together, all their pocket money, everything together, and that lady still has more than that. And she's so unhappy. So the idea that wealth would make you happy is not true. And anyone who has wealth will tell you. The idea that merely a beautiful girlfriend or wife makes you happy, no way, because she will want you to buy jewelry for her, right? So, and then you'll have fights. I'm just joking, please don't take that too seriously. Or the other way around, the idea that a handsome husband will make you happy, that's nonsense. Happiness are inner values, the values of the heart, okay?
Dhanyavad. Hope that answers your question, Avnish.
Dhanyavad, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. Our next question comes from Trushar Patel, who says, pragmatic question, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. May you kindly please share some wisdom around veganism from a Buddhism, Dharma, and a Himsa perspective.
So there is a sutra, a text, in which the Buddha clearly describes the way he lived when he became a Buddha, which was an absolute vegan lifestyle. So he only drank water, and even the water, he was careful that no beings were going to be harmed. He only ate roots, fruits, and not even fruits that he plucked from the tree, only fruits that fell naturally from the trees, and grass and herbs and leaves. So clearly the lifestyle of the Buddha was a vegan lifestyle. Now, your question, sir, is probably because many Buddhists today, lay Buddhists, are not vegan and not even vegetarian sometimes, you know, like the Punjabis, I'm just joking, and the Bengalis and the Assamese. Many lay Buddhists are not vegetarian or vegan, whereas the monks and the nuns are, or are supposed to. So it's an interesting question that how would that come about? When the founder lived such a pure life, why would that come about? But we need a whole webinar to discuss that. This is related to the Buddha Dharma's pragmatic approach. If we reduce our teaching of Dharma to diet and diet only, do you think it would spread across the world? You know, let me ask you back, Atharva, what do you think? If we reduce it just to diet, this is just about diet, can it spread across the world?
Personally, in my opinion, no. I don't think it would.
Exactly. And that's what happened to Jainism, you see. Jain Dharma is so focused on diet that in order to be a Jain is quite a difficult life. Therefore, Jaina Dharma never went beyond the 10 million people that we still have today among Jains. Whereas Buddha Dharma has about 800 million followers. Some people say only 500 million, but they forget all the Chinese who are Taoists and Buddhists at the same time, you see. So the Chinese government says you need to decide whether you are a Buddhist or a Taoist. But many Taoists are actually Buddhists. They just don't make the distinction. So there are actually 800 million followers of Buddha Dharma, and there are only 10 million followers of Jaina Dharma. So you see, so I actually see the pragmatism in early Buddhist traditions. Let's not make this about diet. Let's make this about the right understanding first. Let's make this about compassion and love for all beings. And then automatically those who become inspired by it and practice it deeper will then automatically become vegetarians and vegans. You see, this is like a Punjabi, I'm just joking. I hope you're not a Punjabi, Atharva. This is like a Punjabi who becomes like really dharmic or really, you know, a good practitioner and suddenly says, you know what, I want to be a vegetarian. Or a Bengali who says, you know what, I don't want to eat fish anymore, right? So I'm just joking here to take the joke out on the Bengalis and the Punjabis, but this is really what the Buddhists meant. Let's not make it about diet, because that is so reducing. Then religion just becomes the religion of the fridge, right? What's in the fridge. And that's so narrow. So that's why the early Buddhists were very pragmatic. Do you understand that?
Dhanyavad, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. Yes, that does make a lot of sense now, looking back at it retrospectively. Thank you.
Thank you. And another question we've got through is from Dharan. He says, I've heard the Buddha said to not bother worshipping gods. Is there truth in this?
It's a good question. So there are different traditions of Buddhism or Buddha Dharma today. They all call themselves Dharma. As I said, they never call themselves Buddhism. This is only an English word invented in the 19th century. In Theravada Buddhist tradition, which is the one in Thailand, in Burma, in Sri Lanka as well, some forms of it, and in Vietnam, in the eastern sort of regions, there one mainly pays attention to the Buddha because one wants enlightenment, because it is only enlightenment that leads us out of suffering. What the Buddha in that context meant is that if you're just worshipping the god of rain all the time, and you're just worshipping the god of wind all the time, and you're worshipping the god of fertility or the goddess of fertility, the Buddha asked, how does that exactly lead to liberation? Do you understand that question, Gajal? The Buddha would say, how does worshipping the god of rain lead you to liberation? And it's a valid question. So when he talked about gods and saying, when he said sort of, well, be a little intelligent there, that's what he meant. He meant the gods of nature. You know that people used to worship the god of rain so that rain would come and that people could till their fields. And that makes sense as well, right? But if you want liberation, if you want enlightenment, does it make sense, Kajal, for you to spend 5 hours a day praying to the god of rain?
No, not quite.
So that's what he meant, okay? That's very important to understand. But other traditions of Buddha Dharma, like in Tibet, where they have all the deities we call our deities. We call them our deities, but they call them their deities. So Ganapati, Shiva, the Divine Mother Devi, everyone is there in Tibet. You just don't know this maybe because you haven't looked at the traditions, but everyone is there in Tibet. And sometimes I wonder whether they in Tibet actually preserved the pujas and meditations better than we did. You know, I'm sort of saying that in a provocative way, because they've been up there for 1,200 years with no one disturbing them, whereas we in India have been highly disturbed for the past 1,000 years, and they were just sitting there and doing their pujas and practices, you see? So I'm saying this sort of jokingly for you to see. So they wouldn't understand if we told them these are our deities. They wouldn't understand it. So clearly they are worshipping our deities, or we are worshipping theirs, however you want to put it. So there are different traditions of Buddha Dharma. That's very important to understand, okay? So there are those that are critical of the gods of nature and saying it's okay to make them happy, but you can't meditate on the god of rain and expect to achieve enlightenment. And then there are those traditions of Buddhism that have all the deities, all the divinities, and they do nothing but japa the whole day with the mala. They're doing mantra repetition, and they even call their tradition the path of mantra. So I rest my case.
Thank you.
Dhanyavad, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. We just have one last question. So from Harsha Sri Ramesh, how did Buddhism and Hinduism diverge during the last few hundred years in India?
Wonderful question. Excellent question. So by about the year 600, now please note, that's about 1,100 years after the Buddha lived, right? By about the year 600, what happened was the many different schools of thought in Hinduism, which included Sankhya, Jainism, and Jainism has 4 different schools. Buddhism had 23 different schools of thought. There's not just one Buddhism. There's the Vaibhashika, the Sautrantika, the Yogacara, the Vijnanavada. The Vijnanavada has the Sautrantika and the Prasangika. Then there is the Madhyamika, which is the greatest school of Buddhism ever. But within the Madhyamika, there is also the Prasangika Madhyamika. These are all individual schools. This is not just one Buddhism. And all these schools, and then there are the Sarvastitvavadis, and then there are the Chittamatri. So there's so many different schools of Buddhism, 23, the Mudgalavadis, right? So I could do a whole webinar just on this one. And all these schools, on the Hindu side, we have the Naiyayikas, we have the Vaisheshikas, we have the Yogikas, the Yogadarshas, we have the Purvamimamsas, we have the Uttaramimamsas, so many different schools of thought. And by the year 600, 700, you know what happened, Atharva? They started squabbling with each other. They started having debates with each other because the kings at that time started supporting those schools only which debated in the best way. So they started having all these squabbles amongst each other and who is the best school and which is the best school. And they started saying to each other, you're out. And this is called the word Nastika. You're out. You don't belong here. So the Buddhists call the Hindus Nastika. Most Hindus don't know this. For the Buddhists, we are the Nastikas. We are we are out. And the Jains start calling the Hindus Nastikas, and by Hindus I mean the Brahmins. And of course the Brahmins obviously started saying they are the Nastikas. And today I'm sometimes amused. Most Hindus today still say the Buddhists are the Nastikas. This is so funny because for them we are the Nastikas, right? So, but this happened only about 700. And then, but then for another 500 years, everyone was still happy. All the big universities in India were mainly Buddhists, actually. We know about the Nalanda University, that's the Nalanda Vihara. That's why the state of Bihar is called Bihar, because of the Nalanda Vihara. We had Vikramashila, so many different universities were Buddhists. And then, now I don't want to say this in any politically incorrect way, then there were invasions in India. And these invasions targeted these universities because these were the centers of knowledge, and they wiped them out. This was when Buddhism came to an end. And it is only there when Buddhism only remained in Thailand and Vietnam and in Tibet, and of course China, right? China is a big hub of Buddhism. So it was then that the overall Dharma tradition became separate, where Dharma in India is what we call Hinduism, Dharma among the Jains is what we call Jainism, and Dharma among the Buddhists is called Buddhism. This is really when it happened, around the year 1200. Does that make sense? 1100 something. I can give you the dates if you like.
No, that definitely makes sense. Thank you, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. And for this whole session, I would like to say Dhanyavad for today's detailed and magnificent insight. I definitely speak for our student community when I say that we as students have been engaged and inspired to learn more about Hinduism. One personal takeaway that I have from this session is how you explain the scientific aspects of Buddhism, as well as the ways of comparing different contributions to the idea of Dharma that I'd never considered before. Kajalji, do you have any takeaways from this session?
Definitely. I think it's been really interesting to see like the vastness of Buddhism and how similar it can be to Hindu Dharmic teachings.
Wonderful. And maybe we can conclude with this verse from the Dharmapada. Dharmapada means the words on Dharma. This is one of the main scriptures of Buddhism, of Buddha Dharma. And this is the 5th verse of the 1st chapter. So the Buddha says, Nahi vairena vairani shamyanti hakadachana avairena tu shamyanti esha, and now listen closely, esha dharma sanatanaha. So the Buddha says that enmity or hostility, aversions, enmities never come to an end through more enmity. It is only through non-enmity, through non-hostility, that they actually come to an end. Only through love, through real compassion, do they come to an end. This is Sanatana Dharma. The Buddha says this is Sanatana Dharma, you see? And there is good historical reason to assume that this was the first usage of the term Sanatana Dharma. So in this sense, if it is true historically that the Buddha was the first person to use the term, then Atharva and Kajal, in a way, we can say we are all indebted to him for that term, you see?
Definitely, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. That revelation was inspiring and indeed new for me in and of itself. I never knew about that, and definitely after this I'm going to start reading and learning more about Buddhism and the Dharmapada.
Excellent.
So
Radha Krishnan, Sarvepalli Radha Krishnan, the second president of India, published a wonderful translation of the Dharmapada. It's excellent with a small commentary, easy to understand. I highly recommend every Hindu should read the Dharmapada. Thank you.
I will definitely add it to my reading list. I would just like to ask you kindly, do you have any other final takeaways? And for students who wish to explore Buddhism further, you mentioned the Dharmapada. Are there any other texts you recommend for people who want to engage more?
Yes, of course. There's innumerable texts. So this is always, I have to qualify this, right? We need a whole webinar just on texts. But there's one more text, if you can remember this one. So Dharmapada, and the second one is the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the sutra on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. How to observe the body, the emotions, our thoughts, and the contents of our thoughts. How to really do that. The Satipatthana Sutta. Okay, so maybe if you like, on your Facebook page, you could post those names so that students can see how they are spelled. Dharmapada and Satipatthana Sutta. And what I would like everyone to take away is the Satipatthana Sutta method, which is called Vipassana. I'm sure you've heard of Vipassana, right? The Sanskrit pronunciation is Vipassana. That's like Scottish English and London English. So the Buddha spoke sort of like a Scottish Sanskrit, which is called Pali. Sorry if there are any Scots. I love your dialect. So Vipassana, is the Buddha's method of how to observe all the states of the body, the states of our emotions, the states of our thoughts, and ultimately even the contents of our mind. How to vividly, keenly observe these. And the method of Vipassana is explained in the Satipatthana Sutta. Okay, does that make sense? 2 texts, Dharmapada, Satipatthana Sutta, one single method explained in the Satipatthana Sutta.
Dhanyavad, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. I'll definitely give those 2 a look. And with that, we would like to thank Acharya Vidyabhaskarji, Dhanyavad, for today's detailed session. And thank you to everyone for tuning in and participating in today's Manthan. If your question was not answered, then don't worry. We'll attempt to get as many answered by Acharya Vidyabhaskarji as possible and out on our channels with weeks to come. And on that note, please do like and share from our channel to stay in touch with all that we have planned. There are plenty more such intellectually engaging and invigorating discussions and opportunities coming your way. And with that, it's thank you from me.
Thank you from me.
And a final thank you to Acharya Vidyabhaskarji. So until next time, wishing everyone a great evening. Namaste and Shubhratri.